All right. Hello, and welcome back to another fun filled episode of the Hammercast. I am your host, Alex, the Hebrew Hammer Salkin. And joining me today at long last is none other than Karen Smith, the Master SFG, uh, bodyweight fanatic, and all around strength mind extraordinaire. We're going to be talking quite a bit about strength training, of course, bodyweight training in particular, something that she and I have a shared passion for, and maybe even a little bit of her origin story, because I don't think a lot of people necessarily know the origin story. I know I don't, so I'll be very curious. And then in addition to that, of course, finding out where StrongFirst Bodyweight is going to be going next in terms of cool new developments, and a good time will be had by all. Now, before we begin this conversation in earnest, I want to remind my listeners, if you have not already, be sure to go get my 9-minute kettlebell and bodyweight challenge. It is, first of all, free. So, kind of can't argue with that price. But the nice thing about it is that it is designed to help you get stronger, even on whatever current program you're doing, because it's focused around one movement, or movement pattern, I should say, that I can almost guarantee you've spent next to no time training, and that is your gait pattern. So, stuff like loaded carries, crawling, other movements that you can learn in about 30 seconds and apply just about as quickly, and do either at the beginning or at the end of your training to help boost your results. It's all right there for you. So all you got to do is go to 9minutechallenge.com and it is yours. And that's the number 9minutechallenge.com, not Nine, although that will still take you there. I had to buy that because I was on a podcast a couple months ago, and the guy put that in his show notes that it was NINE minutechallenge.com. So I was like, well, okay, now I have to go buy it and redirect it and all that other stuff. So in any case, it will work, but just do the lazy thing. Number 9minutechallenge.com. And now, without further ado, Karen, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you asking to be here. It's been a
Absolutely.
been a minute since we've chatted in person.
I know. You know what? I was thinking about this actually. I think the first time I met you in person was at the Easy Strength seminar in Reno in 2012, which of course you would remember because that was your Iron Maiden,
Correct.
and I got to see it with my own two eyes. It was pretty amazing. I remember it was like it's always a big event when someone attempts an Iron Maiden or a Beast Tamer. What was as far as I know, but this was maybe one of the first times you were ever like that on the spot to perform. What was it like? Was it nerve wracking? You were ready? I'm curious.
You know what? It wasn't bad. For me, I mean, I grew up, I guess if you want to talk a little bit of the origin story, and we can go
Yeah.
back to that in a minute, but I was gymnastics, cheerleading. Like I was always having to kind of be on the spot. In that situation, I hadn't told anyone that I was coming to try to do that there. I was just coming to the workshop. So when I got there, I was like, hey, Pavel, I think we can do the Iron Maiden this weekend. And he's like, I will make time for that.
That's great.
So I kind of already had it in my head. It wasn't like I was coming to try it. I was like, I'm doing this thing. And it just so happened that it went well. I mean, it was what I trained for. So it was
Yeah.
like, I'm going to come do this thing. They also had a videographer there that day. So and that wasn't planned. So they were able to capture it. And then they interviewed me. I don't know if you remember that, like, how did I program for it or train for it, which really was kind of very similar to Easy Strength without knowing that I was training because I hadn't been to that seminar yet. Right. But it
Yeah.
kind of fell in line really well. So no, I didn't feel too on the spot. And the way that I trained visualization, like even though all of you guys were right there in front of me, I didn't see any of you. Like I was in my zone. It was kind of like blacked out.
Hmm.
Um, so I didn't see anything but what I was there to do. Like in my mind, I could see like every step of what I had trained for and how I visualized it up to that point.
Yeah, that's awesome. No, I remember visualization is something that people don't talk a lot about. And I think the people at really high levels of performance, they're all doing it. But I think because like most people who are either just getting into strength training or maybe they're intermediates, it seems a little woo woo, kind of like uh, it just is sort of a thing where they kind of like they sort of stay away from it. But it really is very important, like Dave Whitley, who's former master instructor and a performing strongman, somebody you know very well. He's talked about the importance of visualization as well, and he said, when he did his red nail bend, which in the world of strongman training is like it's a very difficult nail. It's like the beast of nails, right? He had the exact same story. He said he he had visualized the attempt so many times in his head that when it happened, it was like there was like a mix of, like reality and visualization, and it was everything went off without a hitch. Um, Now you also mentioned gymnastics, which I'm willing to bet probably plays a role in your love of body weight training, but without going into too many other, future tangential things, let's talk about the origin story. Like, what was your first experience with what we might call strength training? Was it athleticism in terms of like gymnastics, or was it something different?
Yeah, it was definitely probably gymnastics or leading into that. I always had a love for it. My mom used to joke that I was tumbling before I was walking. Like
Hmm.
I would just like, no matter where we're at, she's like, can you stop doing flips like we'd be in the parking lot somewhere, and be like cartwheel here as a kid. So yeah, I guess it was kind of always there. Um, so I did that as a young kid. And then once I got in high school, I started teaching young kids gymnastics. So I was coaching way back then when I was in my early teens. And so I guess it was just inevitable that I was going to eventually be a coach, even though there was that gap between graduating high school and finding, what do you want to do when you grow up? Because I didn't know for a while. And then it just kind of fell into training. And then I had trained for a while. I first got certified in, I think it was 98. So it's been a while.
What,
Um,
98, like
like
as just a trainer in general?
Yes, personal
Wow.
trainer, 1998. And then came across kettlebells for the first time in '04.
Mm.
I was pregnant and I was about to stop training because Kinsey was going to be born like any moment. But at that time, I was selling Brazilian workout clothes on the side as a personal trainer. And I met this lady, and she was opening first kettlebell gym in San Diego, which is where I was working. And I just thought it was some new aerobic fad.
Yeah.
So I didn't really like pay much attention to it. And then fast forward, military moved us from San Diego to DC, and I met a gentleman there doing kettlebells. And I was like, I'm gonna try this thing out. It's been a couple years. Um, so I was like, this is something new. Let's figure it out. So I started doing kettlebells in '07 and went to my first certification in '08 by invitation of the guy who was training me. He's like, hey, you should come to this thing with me. And it's been there ever since. So
That's incredible. I have to ask, was it Sarah Lurie in San Diego? Was that the
yes,
one?
that's who I had sold workout clothes to. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, because didn't Brett Jones work for her for a little while?
Mhm. Yeah, but I hadn't met him, right? So such a small world.
It's
During that time that I lived there, Brett was working there.
Yeah.
Um, Delane Ross had worked there
Oh
or had
wow.
come with Brett. Joanna and Franz were in LA or not in LA, I'm sorry, in La Jolla, which is
Yeah.
where I was coaching. So we were all there, but didn't know each other.
How funny. Yeah, it's funny because I look back at the early days of kettlebell, and if anybody knows anything about it, they think, oh, it was, Minneapolis, St. Paul, because that was like the Dragon Door headquarters. And Pavel lived there for a while, I think, before he trekked out to California. But there was, it seems like, a big kind of a contingent of people who had become big names in the kettlebell world in San Diego. It was just
Yeah.
like all at the same time, independently of one another, not even realizing it. They'd, possibly crossed paths or had some degree of separation that was not even 6 degrees. It was like one
Yeah,
or
and
two.
then of course our paths really crossed in St. Paul. I mean, that's where at that time where we were all getting certified. And I kind of joke when people ask me this. It was like, I knew I had enjoyed coaching, right? And enjoyed helping people and training people. But it really was was going through that stage of I had had my daughter and I didn't know what I was going to do. Was I going to go back to training? Was I going to be with, I actually stayed home with her for a while, but it was kind of that phase of not knowing, right?
Mhm.
And then I went to that first certification and I kind of joke it was like the heavens opened and I'm like, oh, here's my people. Like I
Yeah,
just felt that I was in the right place, and I just never looked back from there. And so
that's
that
great.
kind of what started the path of going to more workshops and really getting involved, getting my name out there, and then getting promoted to teach. So
That's
that's kind
great.
of
Now,
it.
was it one of those things where like you decided you're going to go back and you're going to be coaching again, and you went back to your old clients and you're like, "Hey, I got this brand new thing. It's a kettlebell." And then maybe they thought the same thing you did, like, "Ah, this is some sort of new aerobic fad." Or did you basically just pick up like all new clients, like you just started
It
a new
was
place?
Well, it was different because so I had stopped training when I had her in '04
Hmm.
and we lived in San Diego. And then they moved us to DC.
Oh,
And
right.
at
Yeah.
DC, I was going to open a gym there right after I went to the cert. But then they moved us from DC to Virginia within like weeks. There was a guy there that coached Arius that I was going to open a gym with.
Mm,
And I couldn't, I had to move. So he opened that gym and I opened the first kettlebell gym in Virginia Beach. And so during that time, it was all new clients, and I picked them all up because I was training in my driveway or in the street with kettlebells. And people were like, "What is this crazy thing this lady's doing?
yeah.
Like, she's making these weird noises and she's swinging this thing around. Like, what is this?" So that's how I got all of my clientele. And when I got enough people and it was too cold to try to squeeze in the garage due to space, I opened the gym.
Right on.
So
Yeah,
I
you know,
did
it
that.
was it's funny to think too, back in those days, the kettlebell, I think, was like really like right at the sweet spot where it was just new enough where people were like really intrigued and enamored with it, or they were completely repulsed by it. They're like, this is stupid, this is a fad, this is gonna go away, people aren't even gonna be doing this in 5 years. But it seemed like it was because people would try it and they were like, I feel like I'm experiencing something I didn't even know was possible. It was like super people were super quick to just latch onto it. And now, just the other day, I was at Walmart and they were selling, I could see kettlebells they were selling, and they weren't like rubber coated ones either. They were like cast iron. You know, it's like become so ubiquitous in our culture, but it never used to be like that. It was like you would have to try to describe it. You're like, well, it's like this cannonball with like a handle, and people thought you were crazy, or they were totally excited to try it. Did you have people who were just like this? I mean, you just described people like your neighbors being like, "What is this woman doing?" All those
You know
other
what?
stuff
It was so great back in, I mean, back in those days.
back in
Um,
those days.
but it was, I mean, like, it was the new thing, you know? Like, I opened the gym and I, of course, named it, put kettlebell in the name because it was such a new thing. Right now, I
Yeah,
would not do that because it would be like, that would put me in like one little box. But
yeah.
back then, no one knew what it was. And I was in a military predominant town and opened this new thing. And I did a radio ad. And I mean, in a short time, like my schedule was full. I was teaching 25 classes a week. At the peak, I had about 250 members paying monthly.
Wow.
Um, so I did that from '09 to 2014. And so, yeah, it was really kind of getting the name out there. A ton of my students wanted to like go on and become trainers, even if they were never going to train. And I think that's one thing that kind of got my name out there as well, because so many people kept going back to the certification.
Yeah.
I think the last cert that I taught before the split, um, I had, I think it was somewhere between 9 and 12 people from my gym there with me to get certified while while I was teaching.
Wow.
It had gotten to that point where they were like, she's so passionate about this. Like, we want to, they started traveling all over the country with me too, to go to anything that Pavel was teaching. I would just
That's
have this whole
amazing.
group of people that would come and travel and learn from him. And they started getting excited about it because I was excited about it. So it was a good time.
That's incredible. Yeah, well, that's really the key though, is like it's got to be you have to be really excited about it and passionate about it. And the people who look to you for guidance and insight and what have you, like they just absorb that passion.
Yeah.
And your description of people going on and getting certified is like that's what I did. So my own coach, Scott Stevens, he like from the beginning, he's like, you should think about getting certified. And I remember I was like, I don't think I'm good enough. I don't think I can do it. Oddly enough, the thing that convinced me that I could do it was I took a sales job. I'm sure you've heard of it, Cutco. Back in the day, I used to sell. Are you familiar with Cutco at all? I don't know if they had. No, maybe they don't
No.
have. Maybe the West Coast, this is inconceivable, but in the Midwest, where people are, I think, a little bit more, we'll say, uh, un, uh, unconcerned with letting people into their house with a bag full of sharp knives. I was in direct sales, and so I sold cutlery sets and
Okay.
presentations and stuff.
That
And
makes
so,
sense.
yeah, and so I would have to convince people over the phone, just complete strangers. Like, and these were people who were referred to me by other people. So it wasn't like there were 0 degrees of separation. It wasn't like cold calling or anything like that. But like, I had to tell them I was coming over with a bag full of sharp knives, and I was gonna show them how to use them. And that for whatever reason, that kind of like made me think, well, you know what? If I could get a complete stranger to allow me to do something completely, like theoretically completely insane like that, why can't I do 100 snatches in five
Right.
minutes? Why can't I pass this 3-day thing? So I signed up, but similarly, I didn't plan on becoming an instructor. I thought I was going to go on and become a linguist and all this other stuff. And then I got my degree shortly after I got certified. And I was like, yeah, I just don't want to do that. I think this kettlebell thing seems a lot more fun. Now, how many of your students went on and actually did become full-time instructors and have stayed that way?
Well, none of them at that time were full time. They were all instructors that mostly worked for me. So um, ones that trained there, let's see, Allie, Chris, and Mandy, 4, 5, 6, maybe at least 5 or 6 of them worked for me. And
Wow.
I had more opportunities for them to teach classes when I started, because I was getting promoted, so I would like teach more and teach more and teach, like be traveling more.
Yeah,
So it gave them opportunities to come in and teach more classes,
right on.
to have that.
Now, let's talk about the body weight side of things too, because you're talking about getting promoted and being asked to teach. You became like the face of the body weight certification, and now it's called StrongFirst Bodyweight. I remember, and I think you were there too.
Yes.
It was the
Specialist
Naked
of body
Warrior.
weight.
Yeah, exactly, the specialist in body weight strength, and or the Naked Warrior workshop as they called it. And I remember I was so like unbelievable. I was about as excited for that as I was for my RKC. And again, this was pre-split. Um, I just couldn't believe. I was like, Pavel's finally going to be talking about body weight training, because at that time, as you probably remember, it was like impossible to find, like, apart from the Naked Warrior and I would say to some degree Convict Conditioning as well, because that was another book being sold by the same company. But it was very difficult to find good quality information on body weight training, particularly I would say the technique, because as
That
Pavel
and yeah,
points,
strength.
yeah,
Because it was
yeah,
always calisthenics and be more aerobic like,
yeah,
right? Versus strength.
exactly. So yeah, and because I remember you were there, as I recall, it was you and there were a bunch of other people. I remember that's where I met Fabio, I met Doug Nepidol, and a bunch of other, a bunch of the other crew. Um, but like I said, eventually you ended up becoming the face of the body weight certification, now called Strong First Bodyweight. Do you think your gymnastics background played a role in that at all? Like you just kind of had a natural, like a duck to water, like just ability to do these body weight things because you had this sort of innate knowledge of how to move the body through free space?
Yeah, I definitely think that that plays a part for sure. Um, I don't remember at that time if Pavel knew much about my gymnastics background because it was so long ago,
Hmm.
or if we had talked about it. But I do remember it was after that workshop that we were at where I did the Iron Maiden, that he had called me probably like a month or so after that, because I'm guessing June, because that was in March, June, July timeframe.
Hmm.
And he was like, "Hey, you want to teach this body weight cert?" And I was like, "Cool, yeah. What do I need to do?" And he's like, "A 1 arm push up." And I was like, "How?" And he said, "Figure it out. Figure it out."
Very Pavel thing to do.
Very Pavel, right? So I started making everyone in the gym do 1 arm push-ups. I was like, "We're going to start at the wall. I don't care how old they were, how fit they were, how whatever. We
Yeah.
all did them." And then I just kind of started tracking and like beta testing with everyone and figured out how to get myself there and get other people there. And then I went to that event, which I think we went to that event in October, if I'm thinking time frame correct. I'm normally pretty good
Yeah,
with
I think it
dates, but
was I think it was October like 2012. Something
yeah,
like that. Yeah, it was in Minneapolis, St. Paul, freezing cold.
yeah. So I had 4 months from figure it out
Yeah,
to show up there and pass. And I was like, let's do this. Let's make it
amazing.
happen.
What's it like
So,
getting a phone call from Pavel? I gotta ask.
um,
Probably now
well,
it's normal,
I
but
mean,
at
I'm
the
glad I
time.
accepted it because it didn't say his name. It would be like private, right?
Oh, right, yeah.
Now I would because I have him in my phone, but like it back then it was private. And I was like, is this a sales call or am I
Yeah.
answering this call? So that happened a couple times where I would answer and then be pleasantly surprised,
Sure.
think someone's punking you, or in the early days, like, why is Paulo calling me?
Yeah. Yeah. I asked because I got an email from him a couple months ago because of an article that I wrote for Strong First, and I was like, it made my day. I was like,
Yeah.
reached out. This is cool. I think it would be scary, at least at first, you get a phone call from Pavel, like, what did I do?
Yeah.
Like normally it's like I get an email, like if this is a phone call, it's got to be urgent. But that was a pretty fortuitous phone call because gave you I kind of like that approach, figure it out, as opposed to, oh, here's what you got to do. Most people would be like, let me give you the exact thing that you got to do. But very often it's just figuring out on your own is what actually gets you that deeper insight into what it means to achieve a variety of different things at a higher
Yeah.
level.
And I think that that was probably what kind of led me to be teaching that more.
Yeah.
Um, if I'm really, I mean, I could be wrong, but like it's because I was working with so many different levels of and ages of people trying to get them to do the one arm push up, it I started kind of working with a lot of different progressions in a lot of ways. So it wasn't just like I had all these strong people that were already really strong,
Yeah.
um, and then put them into something. It was like, okay, let's take anyone and everyone.
Yeah.
And then it got to be where like, okay, well, now I need these to be where I can teach people to teach them, right?
Right.
That's what the certification is. So what is going to give them the biggest tool bag of different cues and different progressions that are going to produce the outcome that we want and give people that aha moment. Because what I teach at the bodyweight cert, one thing that I always tell the coaches is you're going to be training people that don't necessarily, they're not necessarily like us, that are going to be okay with one or two exercises and do that and nothing else, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they need variety. Um, so I tell them that you have to give them something that's going to make them feel successful, right? They have to have a progression, a regression, something that they can do comfortably, challenging, right? Simple, not easy, that, but they feel is achievable. If everything you give them is so beyond where they're at, they're going to get defeated. They're
Yeah.
going to think they're a failure. They're going to think they're not going to be strong enough. And then they backtrack or they find someone else that's going to give them something different, right? So that's how I look at that certification is I'm glad we're all coming in here strong, but it's not about us being strong. It's about us being able to produce other strong people
Mm-hmm.
to do what it is that we want them to do. So that's where all of that kind of came into play is just practice and what Pavel teaches all the time, right? Taking a movement pattern or skill and reverse engineering it, which is
Mm-hmm.
going to give you progressions, regressions for that person,
Yeah.
right? How does their body move? What does their body need? Is it flexibility? Is it mobility? Is it stability? To put the whole package together. Is
Definitely.
that's kind of how I look at things.
Certainly. Yeah, I think you hit on an important point about the importance of variety. There's people who get really strong, they learn, okay, especially if you're trying to get really good at like one specific thing, the closer you're getting to that like peak, the more you have to be really, really specific. But if you train like that all the time, number one, it just seems like it's easier to get the aches and tweaks and discomfort and stuff like that. But people also really do like to kind of like enjoy their training, even if they would say otherwise. Like I discovered this too, but a lot of times people will tell you one thing, like I want to do X, Y, and Z, and you can write it as like in the margins that that's what they want to do. But really, they want to, like anybody else, want to look better naked, and they want to have, a fun time with their training. I had a guy many years ago when I was teaching at the Dragon Gym in Pennsylvania who came to me and he said that he wanted to learn the swing. He just wanted to get good at the swing and get up.
Okay.
And he was in his 70s. He had had a back surgery that rendered his feet, like the bottoms of his feet, basically with very little feeling in them. So it's kind of hard to swing when your feet aren't sending the signals to your legs that are necessary for like balance and coordination purposes. But we trained together for like it was like twice a week for 8 weeks, and he had shoulder mobility issues. So as we worked through those very slowly, we couldn't really do a lot of weighted get up work. But I did get him to hit a PR in his deadlift, kettlebell deadlift, despite his difficulties in sensation at the bottom of his feet. But at the end of the 8 weeks, he was like, "Yeah, I don't really want to continue because all we're doing is like swings and get ups." And I was like, dude, I'm just doing what you said. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. People want to have a good time. They certainly might want to get really good at some things, but not at the expense of having a good time. Uh, Looking better naked again, that's always a big thing.
Yeah.
And
I
it's
think there's
super
that,
easy.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, 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 go for it. Go for it.
I was just gonna say I think there's that fine line. So when I said variety, and I know you agree with this, it's specialized variety, right?
Yes.
Not
Yeah.
just variety for the sake of entertainment,
Hmm.
but being able to give enough variety that they might see it as something more enjoyable, right? Because you were waving the load through different progressions and regressions, but not just variety for the sake of variety, which is a lot of what's out there right now, which
Yeah.
we can talk about that a little bit too, because the world is a different beast right now in social media.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, so I think that it needs to be enjoyable, or for the most part, unless they're like us, right? We like to train, we like to kind of nerd out on this stuff. They need to enjoy what they're doing, or they're
Yeah.
not going to do it. At least not
Exactly.
to definitely not to the high level for some of those goals. Sinister, Beast Tamer, Iron Maiden, one arm push up, pistols, like whatever it may be. If they're not really in it and enjoying it, most of the time they're going to stop.
Yeah, exactly. And then they're going to go do something that might be more like, we'll say either less effective, more likely to be injurious or whatever, and but still more fun at the time. So it's like people want to balance all of these things. Now, one of the things that I'm curious about with StrongFirst Bodyweight is because, Pavel basically gave you the reins. And I think if I recall correctly, you were like, okay, so, what do you want me to do? How do you want me to kind of steer the ship? And he kind of, didn't he just also say like, figure it out, or like, it's up to you. You're kind of in charge now.
Yeah, a little bit of that. I mean, he obviously had a great manual already. I don't know
Of
if you
course. Yeah.
remember from when we were writing content at that other event because it was a new event.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, there was the leeway of like, here's the manual, and then I was able, and then some of the others now as well, we were able to kind of throw in other progressions, right? So there's that percentage that is not necessarily in the manual, but like it may be in the next stage of the manual. We've had a lot of different manuals over time. So yes, there was some kind of free reign on. It doesn't have to be exactly like Naked Warrior, but we need to use these principles. And then how do we get people there and get them to get other people there?
Hmm.
So there was a little bit of flexibility there.
Right on. Is there ever going to be like a level 2 body weight, or do you think that's just beyond the capacity of like most trainees?
I honestly would love that and have been talking about it for years. Um, will it happen? I don't, that's a good question. Um,
Now, what would it consist of? That's the next question, because you cover quite a bit.
in my eyes, okay, what I would think, or what I would like to see, because in the early stage of the manual we had muscle ups, right? So some people, but like strict muscle ups,
Vaguely, I do remember that. Yeah.
that's not that's not taught. That was just an article in the manual, and that article is now on the instructor page,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Alexei Senart wrote that one, right?
Yeah, and
Okay, I do
actually he
remember that.
came to Dallas shortly after I moved here, and he was going to be here the weekend that I was teaching body weight here in Dallas. And so I
Hmm.
had him teach that. I was like, okay, let's
Oh,
spend
nice.
this little bit of time. Let's cover that because you're here. But it is very challenging. So I would say would probably be level 2, right?
Yeah.
Front lever, we teach a little bit. I definitely try to teach the progressions at the end, but it's so far from some people. I think that could be a good one. So like muscle ups, front lever, back lever, planche, maybe. I have some progressions for people trying to learn how to do planches. Um, I think Pavel has, I mean, I know he has, but I would like to potentially see um, his dips and his all the progressions he has in that training
Yeah.
possibly in there. So freestanding handstand push-ups or just freestanding handstands.
That'd be
I
cool.
think there's a lot of stuff that could be in there. It's just we're still at the stage of, I personally feel we just still need people. We need people
Yeah.
in the, because there's so much content in it. Like almost always I hear from people, man, I wish I'd done this sooner,
Yeah.
right? See what it can do. Because if you train body weight the way that we do, and I know you 100% will agree with me on this, all of the other certs are going to be easier, right? You're going to be able to pass all the others. You're going to be
Yeah.
able to press that body weight, that half body weight press. You have to press at your level 2. You're going to be able to hit that deadlift, that bench press, that military press at your barbell certification. Like I would say it's very uncommon if someone comes in and does their time with body weight and one arm push up to not pass the others, unless it's a mobility issue, something like that.
Yeah. 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 The understanding how to generate tension from nothing makes it a lot easier to generate tension once there is an element of like feedback. So we talk about feed forward tension, get tense before you grip up with the kettlebell and or the barbell. But when you really know how to do that, and your enemy, quote unquote, is gravity and leverage and stuff like that, as opposed to just the implemented hand, it makes a tremendous difference.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what feed forward tension is. We teach that at the body weight because feed forward tension is maximally contracting your body without an external load.
Yeah.
So can you make your muscles tense? And so when I start the conversation of body weight at the certification, is basically I'm going to teach you to take your muscles under control, maximally contract them, and then have them work in favor of what it is you're working towards by knowing the right leverage and the right progressions or regressions for your body.
Yeah.
That's pretty much what body weight
Here's a
strength
move.
is.
Here's a move that I've thought, And I don't know. This would probably wouldn't make it to the level two, even though I think it could. Because there are not a lot of, a lot of times people think, well, you can't really make your lower body all that strong with body weight, and if you give them any options to think about, you'd think maybe like a pistol squat. Generally, my sense is that once people, provided your mobility is in place, once you can do pistol squat, you can relatively quickly build up to doing quite a few more. But I think like a Nordic curl would be a heck of like a lower body exercise to add to a level two. Now the one difficulty is that that's like, from my perspective anyway, that's like the one arm pull up of the lower body because it's just so difficult. It's like all hamstrings.
Yeah.
Uh, really, you also need, I think, some kind of like some sort of like a special apparatus to do it. So it's not as simple and as like pull up bar or some rings or some space on the floor or what have you. Um, but that is like a heck of a good move for building just like freakishly strong legs, particularly with something that we normally don't do, which is like kind of hamstring curl sort of a movement.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think too, if we're thinking strictly body weight, I think the most underrated, to be honest, that where you don't need tools is the single leg deadlift or single
Mhm.
leg, that pattern, right?
Yeah.
That hinging pattern, getting deep in the glute and the hamstring, going slow, holding those positions, doing isometric holds. I was able, this kind of by accident, is, obviously we do that unloaded before we load. I want to work your balance, your stability in your joints before we load it up with bells or whatever, and then move on to all the other single leg progressions to get to pistols. But by doing the demos over and over again at these certs and teaching stability, right? We want the ankle stable. We don't want you pronating because then that's going to drop your knee in and then everything else is going to wiggle the way up, right?
Mhm.
Um, by doing that, I was teaching a workshop and I was happened to be teaching the single leg deadlift. And they were like, well, how would you set up and wedge, right? First, you got to teach people to understand wedging, but how would you wedge and do a single leg deadlift with a barbell, right? So that it's not twisting and turning. And at that time, I went to set up for it. It was already loaded. I was not
Mhm.
expecting it to come off the ground at all. It was just more of me teaching that wedging and what were my hands going to be and did I alternate or did I hook grip or whatever. And it came off the ground and it was more than body weight, quite a bit more than body weight.
Wow.
In my brain, I was like, okay, if we spent more time under tension, more time holding the positions of the single leg deadlift, um, that people would be amazed when they go back to their double, right? Like normal deadlift, sumo deadlift, conventional deadlift, where you have 2 feet on the ground too, right? So very rarely do I train barbell deadlifts because they're just not great for my spine. I have scoliosis and
Mhm.
some other stuff going on. So, but when I test it, I normally can be somewhere between 1.6, 1.8 times body weight without doing that. And then, of course, the max was my 2 times body weight deadlift before I had my hip procedure done.
Mhm.
So it can give you a lot of strength that people don't think about. They don't
Yeah.
think that that pound for pound strength is going to be enough for lower body, but you can hit some really good numbers when you go back if you spent time like slow strength
I think
with
the isometrics component is big too because that's like one of the, I don't want to say like undiscovered countries of strength, but it really is something that people have stopped doing. And it used to be that, I don't know, I read some articles recently, and like in the 40s and the 50s, there were some lifters who made it a point to do a lot under the tutelage of a particular coach. They would do a lot of isometric stuff, and it's like their strength just exploded. But part of the reason people just wrote it off was because this coach had them doing what would now be considered like a ridiculously small amount of steroids. So they were doing like some anabolic steroids, but it doesn't explain all of like the strength and muscular growth that they got from it. And it's like being able to hold a position like that and really get comfortable at the leverage that's ideal for your body. Because, we're talking about like a single leg deadlift, even if it's unweighted, like what you're talking about, you're not going to get away with poor technique uh, or poor positioning for very long if you have to hold that position. It's like
right.
you end up at exactly where your body needs to be for your own leverages and your own unique build, and then just holding that tension and building up that stability and familiarity has like a colossal impact on your
Yeah.
overall
And
body strength.
let's think of it this way too, or at least I want to clarify this because I know a lot of people look at RDLs. single leg dead, like what's what, right?
Yeah.
In my mind, tell me if you think of this as the same or different, but I see a lot of people, they think of the single leg as an RDL, which is the straight leg, bend over, right? A lot of hamstring stretch,
Yeah.
not really getting into the athletic stance. So I look at those two different. If you're doing a RDL, it is more straight leg, right? If I'm doing a single leg deadlift, I am wanting that working side to be in athletic stance. I want more glute, I want more hamstring, I want more quad, I want it all. I'm
Yeah.
not just going to lean at the waist. I want to send those hips back as far as I can, get deeper, not deep enough to be parallel or in a squat, but get the hips back. And then I don't care about, oh, I'm using this makeup brush. I picked it up to show you this, but I don't want to lean so far forward that my leg is like even with
Yeah.
my body, right? I want to be like just barely have that foot off the ground, because it's not about how high it goes, right? I
Yeah.
want it to be straight, because I feel like as soon as they bend their knee, they have a tendency to bend their spine, especially if they're going to later lift weight, right? Pick weights up. So I just want them to like barely send that leg back. So I spend a lot of time in athletic stance, isometric folds, then start doing stuff with the non-working foot
Hmm.
and keeping the other one stable. So there is a difference in my mind in an RDL and a single leg deadlift, just to put that clear for the
Yeah, big
people that
time.
are
I
question.
see a lot of times people try to do, and I think it seems to be like the physical therapy world too, because I have an online student who he's shown me like what his PT has had him do, and I'm not criticizing his PT, but his idea of a single leg deadlift versus mine is quite a bit different. So like if you see a picture of me doing one, I think it would be probably similar to what you're describing, where the working leg, there's more knee bend, there's more hip bend. It looks a lot more like a heavy kettlebell swing in terms of the positioning. And then like the back leg stays straight for the reasons you described. Similarly, I try to keep the knee straight because I find it's easier. It's like a rudder kind of, you have, otherwise you've got this completely wayward limb just like pulling you off balance. So you really have to keep the back leg as straight as
About
possible.
pushing, and you're trying to actually go back, right? Like you're trying to reach
Exactly.
something behind you versus just lean forward into that position. So absolutely like a swing.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, it's amazing the difference that it makes, and people don't. And the other thing too is like if you haven't done them in a while and you do them, like your glutes will be sore for days because now also you got your glute medius firing up like nobody's business to try to stabilize everything. I did some single leg deadlifts a couple weeks ago for the first time in a while, and it took probably like 5 days before the soreness dissipated, and I wasn't even doing anything super crazy. It was like a set or two, I think, and
Yeah,
it made a
I,
big
I think
difference.
so too. I mean, I teach different workshops. I'm about to head over to Australia and teach a few workshops along the way before I get to Brisbane to teach
Yeah.
the Bodyweight Cert. And I talk about the like those workshops cover what are my two skills that have the most carryover for anything else. If I could do nothing else but it's body weight, what would I do? And it would be the one arm push up and the single leg deadlift for sure. So in that, I'll give a tip, kind of like a little bonus to the people who listen. One thing that's really important for stability purposes on anything that's single leg, think about, we always hear make sure the knee tracks the toe, right?
Mhm.
But I don't like that. I say make sure it tracks the middle toes,
Mhm.
because if it's tracking the big toe, then you have a greater chance of that valgus collapse. And
Yeah.
then once everything's out of alignment, you're not going to have the balance that you need. So if you guys are going to try them, I would say make sure that your knee tracks the middle toes. You have like that good rooting in the ground. You're going to be more stable. And then there's a whole visualization that I teach at the bodyweight cert, but I'll leave that out and let them have to, maybe potentially come to a bodyweight cert at some point.
Yeah, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And by the way, that also includes the upcoming Australia one. So you're going to be in Brisbane. I was just there earlier this year. I
Yeah.
always have a blast. I taught Pierce's gym as you were going
Oh,
to be.
he's so great.
Yes, Pierce is awesome. He's always a great host. Australia, have you been there before? Is this your first time?
I have been to Perth, but I haven't
Okay.
been to the other side. So I was there in 2015
Mm,
with Sean and Tim Allman to
right,
teach the
yeah.
bodyweight cert there. And then I
Cool.
haven't been back since. So this time will be interesting. Pierce has been great. He set me up a whole path. So I'm going to go to fly into Melbourne, teach a workshop there, teach in Sydney along the way. He's meeting me there,
Nice.
road trip. Then I'm going to teach in Sydney, and then I'm teaching Brisbane, those three different workshops. And then teach the bodyweight cert before I
Wait,
come back home.
now, did you say a road trip? Where are you road tripping from?
Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane.
Okay, maybe that won't be as bad. But I think it's like 14 hours between Sydney and Brisbane, which is why I asked. Because it's like people forget, like Australia is not just a country, it's a continent. So it'd be
Yeah,
like
no, I think it is going to be, I mean, we have from, I'm flying in on, I think I get there Thursday or Friday the 20th.
okay,
And then I don't teach the body weight cert until whatever that very next weekend is. So I have like a whole week to do all of that.
traverse the country. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're gonna enjoy it. One thing I always I can never get used to when I'm there is just driving on the other side of the road. Like no matter what, it's like it just feels like there's gonna be a collision of some sort, or there's like um but I can imagine doing it in a road trip style, you'll probably get used to it very quickly. Uh,
Yeah, we'll see. I've left it all up to Pierce. I'm like, let's just do this thing and it'll be
he'll
cool.
he'll get you pretty well taken care of, and you'll like Brisbane as well. By the way, I've been to Sydney a couple times. I really like it. Melbourne's awesome. There's something really nice about Brisbane. It's I think it's not as often traversed by tourists, so you get a little bit different feel of like the Aussie life. Um, I don't know what he has planned, but if he can swing it, ask him to take you to the Australia Zoo.
Okay.
It's in Queensland. It's like I think 45 minutes away from Brisbane, so it's not like
He lives,
super.
right? He lives in Queensland.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I don't know exactly where in because Queensland is like the state, so it'd be like Dallas within Texas. Although I don't think the size is comparable. Um. So, but I remember because he took me there. My first trip actually was 2015 as well, um, and it was like the most incredible zoo I've ever been to. It was Steve Irwin's old stomping grounds. I mean, that's like his wife and kids. I think still kind of like are at the helm of the zoo. But I got a picture taken with a koala. I don't know if you've ever seen. I've posted it a time or two on Facebook. They had
Awesome.
like yeah, it was awesome. You could get pictures taken with other significantly more dangerous animals, like for a higher price because it was like a service you
Yeah.
would pay for. But I didn't feel like shelling out, for instance, $200 to take my risks getting a picture taken next to a tiger. So $20 for like a koala seemed pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
Um,
No, that sounds much. And safer for sure.
Likely, yes, the koalas seem far less dangerous, from what I know. But who knows? Australia has a reputation for having a lot of killer animals. So,
Yeah.
um, but you know what? I think American does too. Now that I think about it, because they just have like poisonous kind of animals, and we've got like grizzly bears and like mountain lions and like large, like terrifying animals. They have like small poisonous ones. I think that's their claim to fame.
Yeah. I think
But
so.
koalas don't exactly fall into either of those categories. So you'll be good to go. Now, um, final couple of questions.
Mhm.
What are your own personal goals in terms of your, let's say, body weight skills, kettlebell skills, barbell skills that you're working on? And how do you manage to keep those goals in check when you're traveling a lot for work and other things like that?
Honestly, this is crazy to say. I would say the last year and a half, I have worked out probably the least amount
Hmm.
that I have in decades. Um, Obviously, the body weight you can do anywhere, right? So I'm kind of re-getting. I had had an injury in my shoulder, so I didn't want to cause a huge asymmetry. So I haven't done as much. So I'm getting the one arm push up back. I try to just honestly, maintain the strength for everything that I have to teach.
Hmm.
But the reason I say the last year and a half is a year ago, January a year ago, 23, I found a gym that I'm helping at that I love. It's a nonprofit and it's an adaptive gym. So I'm doing more coaching right now, which is limiting my time for my own things. But I'm doing enough, right? I'm keeping that baseline high so I can teach everything that I have to do. So I don't have any like crazy goals other than to just stay strong for life, right? Train for life, train for every day. But I've really been enjoying working with adaptive athletes. So, what that is, in case people are listening and I'm not sure, is for this nonprofit, it's called Adaptive Training Foundation. And everyone who comes through the program has an adaptation, meaning spinal cord injury, brain injury, visually impaired, amputation. And we put them through a 9-week program called Redefine. And get them doing things that they never thought they could do again, right? Like one of my guys had fallen 4 stories off a building at San Diego State when he was a freshman in college, and he'd been in a wheelchair for 11 years.
Wow.
Day one, he's like, I want to walk. So I'm like, let's see what we can do, right? Me and the team. And it's always a team. It's not just like I may be the lead instructor for that person that was assigned to me, but there's always a group of people, support staff, other trainers. So we give them everything we can, 2 hours a week for 3 times a week for 9 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of that 9 weeks, he walked around the gym, right?
Wow.
So was it ideal? I mean, we still kind of had to be there, right? There were so many other factors, but we were able to take him from the chair to get out of the chair, use the get up. I use the get up a lot to get him to roll over, not necessarily weighted because of other adaptations that he had, but like using the body, right, as the momentum to roll in that pattern. Then we went from that to, could we stabilize in a, hands and knees position, quadruped, and then off the knees? Then could we crawl? Then could we stand? Could we get back in the chair? So we just did all of those things. And it's so inspirational. Like, it's like I've spent so much time there helping, that I just was like, oh, I need to get back home and train some people so that I can, keep doing what it is that pays the bills. Right. But that type of training and using what I learned from Pavel and from the StrongFirst principles of how to reverse engineer things. Because that's like at the extreme level. Like, I need to get this person to do something that they may or may not ever be able to do again. Right. So it's like a mindset approach with them. And then it's carried on this year. A friend of mine who was working at a brain clinic and doing strength conditioning for them brought me on to work with her because we both travel. She's like, let's tag team this. We can, because we're both in and out, we'll still cover the ground. So in that area, I'm training and helping her train veterans with traumatic brain injury. So that's kind of just taken a lot of my time. But of course, I still teach the certs. I still train all of my in-person and online. But as far as my own goals, they're like right here. They're like, let's stay strong for life and be able to do and teach all the things that I have to teach. And then of course, we always have great assistants who can do some fancy things and do some of the advanced stuff as well. So that's kind of where I'm at.
It's a perfect example of strength having a greater purpose. Being able to use the stuff that a lot of us take for granted. Like, we just want to look better. We just want to feel better. Maybe we want to lift something heavy to feel good about ourselves. But you can use these same principles to really impact somebody's life on a more fundamental and foundational way, like helping them to relearn how to walk after a traumatic injury, or regain their confidence in their abilities after maybe losing a limb or having some sort of another injury that leaves day-to-day tasks that we take for granted as something that they have to, skills that they have to relearn, maybe in their 40s, 50s, or beyond. So that is very cool.
It's so amazing too, like you said, the importance of something as simple as your gait, right? So think about the importance of gait, but now I'm having to worry about what does that look like with one leg and one prosthetic, and how does the body move, and where's the prosthetic at? Is it above the knee? Is it below the knee? Is it higher in the hip? Like, how are we going to get people doing the patterns that they need to do? How do we modify? I've been working with some of them with kettlebell moves that have to be modified. So I hope that there's a way to kind of bring that to a new standard, if they decide they want to go to the certification and like test out, because there's certain things that, depending on the prosthetic, it's not going to move the same way that we would normally test it. So how do we look at that in that, what is that adaptation going to be? And then what is that testing going to be? So hopefully that'll kind of become more prevalent in the certifications.
Absolutely. No, that'd be great. I think, that's something that's crossed my mind too, is that there've got to be people who have been in the service and gotten injured, or, through a variety of other circumstances have gotten injured, where their technique will be non-standard, but might still be able to follow the principles, but we'd have to perhaps look at it differently. And no, that'd be very cool. I do hope that that ends up becoming something that becomes sort of standard within StrongFirst, because I can see that being something that, again, also really lives up to the principle that strength has a greater purpose. So that's very exciting.
It is too, like, the other thing that I love about us is like being the student forever, right? Like, I've been at the kettlebell game for a really long time, right? And I know there's a lot of people I know I mentioned the social media thing. There's a lot of people that are maybe learned kettlebells in the last couple years, right? They became the kettlebell expert during COVID.
Yeah.
Maybe don't have any zero desire to ever go to a certification, and they look at it as, oh, those old people doing the things they do, right? And but not looking at, we're still over here being students, right? Yes, we have the experience. We've learned how to reverse engineer, and now we're taking the movements and putting them into other areas, not just because we care about likes and follows, right? Because it's the cool thing. It's like, okay, well, what if we look at something like the get up as something that could be life-saving for someone, right? If you have someone that's in a wheelchair and they can't move fast enough in that wheelchair and there's a fire, what are they going to do?
Yeah.
Right? If we can teach them to get out of the chair, roll over, get into a crawling position, and use the stability in their body as much as possible, or even if they had to crawl just with their hands, like we're looking at it as a different way.
Yeah.
Right. So I just feel like there's so much to keep learning that I would never be like, hey, yeah, I've been doing this for over 25 years, call myself an expert. Right.
Right.
We joke about there's no such thing as the perfect swing. So I wouldn't say that. I would say that just, I don't know, just the love of learning and being able to use it in different ways that are inspirational for the people that are wanting to take it on. You know,
Yeah.
that makes sense to, I don't know.
Makes sense to me.
That's where I'm
That
at.
that love of learning is what propels you forward. And even if you think, gosh, I still have so much more to learn, at some point somebody's going to ask you a question and you're going to have an answer that's going to blow their mind. And to you, it just seems totally like foundational, fundamental, like not even a big deal. Doesn't everybody know this? But like it'll really change their life. But the only way to do that is you've got to be sort of like motivated to learn yourself and just have this love of constantly absorbing this new information and trying to send it out into the world in any way you can.
Yeah, and that's what I love, and I love that that's what, for the most part, people see, because when they see that I have passion for that, that's kind of what comes back in the evals is they know that I'm wanting them to succeed. They know that I'm passionate about teaching them and helping them get to that next level. Um, and that's what I do this for, is to help people, and whether they want to be certified or not, right? Whether they want to just get better. Um, that's what I love, is that they know I'm passionate about it. They know that my biggest thing is to try to be helpful to them in some form or fashion.
That's awesome. Very, very cool. Well, where can people follow you online? Website, social media, all that other stuff.
I am on all of it, but I'm not on all of it that often anymore.
Yeah.
Just due to the schedule. But I would say more than anything, if they go to my website, they can find all of those.
Mhm.
So that's just coachkarensmith.com. And then there's links to all the other social media. So occasionally I still do stuff on Facebook, but Instagram probably the most. Even as infrequent as that is, I still try to at least get on and put stuff in the stories or market stuff. So I'm trying to get better at getting back to that. But that is _coach_Karen_. A lot of underscores.
I was just
But
about to say, you took the words out of my mouth.
yeah, it's because there's too many Karen Smiths. You can't find
Yeah.
Karen Smith anything and be the first at it, right? So I have to
I
put
was,
coach in front of it in the early days.
yes, I was going to say, if you had gotten karensmith.com, I'd be like, you're probably sitting on a gold mine because there's got to be somebody who's willing to pay a lot of money for that. But Coach Karen Smith is still pretty good.
Yeah, I did. You know what? I did that at the time of the split, because at the time I wasn't, when it first happened, I didn't know what was happening.
Right.
So I was
Yeah.
like, well, I got to grow my name just in case this isn't going to become something.
Yeah.
Um, but then there was always that, right? I was always going to do that. If Pavel was doing something, like I was going to follow and keep learning from him. So yeah, I put on Coach Karen Smith and just kind of went with that because there wasn't a
Good
karensmith.com.
deal. Good. So, dear listeners, coachkarensmith.com _coach_Karen_Smith. Oh,
No
there's an
Smith.
at in front of all the. Oh, no, it's just
Yeah,
okay.
no, it's just at _coach_Karen_.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Perfect. All
Yeah.
right. On
No Smith
Instagram.
on the Instagram.
Yeah, I was gonna say I was about to put you in the same situation that podcast put me in. You're gonna have to get like a whole brand new one and just like send people over to the original one.
Yeah, that
But
one's probably taken too. Who knows?
yeah, that's very possible. At this point, there are still a lot of underscores yet to be had, and I'm sure that one has been claimed. So, well, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been great catching up.
Having me.
Absolutely. And folks, as always, have fun and happy training.